We'll probably still have big discussions about top of funnel and bottom of funnel and how they're related. There'll be an evolution in platforms. There might be an evolution in the ways that we get people's attention. But I think the how that we reach people will be very much the same, because the one thing that isn't going to change is the gating system of the human brain.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Now Next Future content series by Adverity and LinkedIn. I am Fabio De Bernardi, I'm VP of Business Development at Adverity, and I'm your host today. I'm delighted to be joined today by Mimi Turner. Welcome, Mimi. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, Fabio. Thank you very much. My name is Mimi Turner. I head the B2B Institute at LinkedIn, which is a marketing strategy think tank, and I run our EMEA operations. So I'm based in this very building, which I'm very happy about.
Fantastic, and we're blessed by gorgeous sunshine today. Now, today we have a hard task. We need to gaze into our virtual crystal balls to try and predict what the challenges will be in the 2030s for our fellow marketers. Today, together, we'll be trying to guess what's going to be most relevant in 2030s. And can we start with a pretty broad question about what do you think marketing in the 2030s will be like?
2030s sound like a really long time into the future, but in fact they're not. So in a sense, you are asking a question that we have some visibility over. There will still be marketers of that, I'm fairly certain.
Good.
There will be products that people need to communicate and to sell. And I think a great deal of our marketing environment will be very, very recognizable. We'll probably still have big discussions about top of funnel and bottom of funnel and how they're related. I think that we can predict that within the B2B category, that there will be growth and that there'll be more businesses spending more money on marketing and advertising. There'll be an evolution in platforms. There might be an evolution in the ways that we get people's attention. We've gone from a 30-second spot to what I've always wanted, much shorter form content and creative that can be actually able to crystallize the value within a shorter period of time than we're traditionally used to. But I think the how that we reach people will be very much the same, because the one thing that isn't going to change is the gating system of the human brain. The human brain, the wetware of the human brain, is fundamental to the process of whether marketing works. And all the spreadsheets in the world don't necessarily help us with that one challenge. At some point, marketing has to enter somebody's brain. If it doesn't enter your brain, the money was wasted.
The brain for sure is not going to change in the next decade, so we can be sure about that. Now, this is something that I really want to talk about, Gen AI. Oh, I've said it. Now, of course, Gen AI is in generative AI, but I've been toying with this idea. Should we translate into generation AI? Can we expect the people that will be marketing practitioners in the 2030s to be of a generation where AI has done a lot of the work for themselves, and what could be the consequences? I know I've read a study from LinkedIn about skills first and the importance of skills rather than necessarily qualification or degrees, and sometimes I struggle and I feel like if AI is going to create the creatives we see, if it's going to create content for people, what are people going to do? So do you think that a generation AI might be...
Well, Fabio, I'm going to ask you your question first of all, because that will buy me a little bit of time to think about it. How do you see that question?
I think that everything sort of goes in cycles, and right now Gen AI is still, to a large degree, like primordial. It's the beginning. It's looking very promising.
I love that word, primordial.
Yeah. Technology and people and marketing as a practice, but not just marketing, will find its balance. So there might be a phase of going to one extreme or of thinking or trying to get technology, whether we call it AI or anything else, to replace what we do. There will be human control. At some point, the technology will get better. So actually, funny enough, yesterday with some colleagues, we were talking about, Gen AI can write whatever content, but you still need a human to make sure that the content is on brand and ticks all the boxes. But then for sure AI will learn that as well. So we'll probably get to a point where we try to push AI, something's not going to work just yet, and the humans will regain control. So I have a hope for this hypothetical Gen AI, that they will be able to still carve out a meaningful role in the picture and use technology to make their lives easier, but not by stepping away from the responsibility and the innate creativity that we have as humans, which I think is most of what makes us human.
I need to break down that question a bit. And I think it will mean that we get to spend more of our time doing the things that only we can do and make us able to do more in less time. So I think that we'll actually see some greater need for the things that are human and a greater support system from decisions and information that can be pre-sorted so that we have less time-consuming decisions or less time-consuming processes and things to do.
Fantastic. And what you say resonates a lot with the experience I've had in the last almost 15 years now in working with sort of technologies. And even though we didn't use the term artificial intelligence until quite recently, but the idea of getting technology to remove the busy work, the drudgery or whatever expression you said is very important. So it still stuck in my mind. Like when I studied actually at Verity, I spoke with a number of our clients, and the first client who said we spend about 80% of our time like collecting data and making it ready to be analyzed for the client, and only about 20% in delivering value, in this case in the shape of campaign learnings and recommendations to the client. I was shocked, and I thought like, well, you paid, but only the 20% of your time is actually delivering value. And I thought, this must be, like, this is one of my first meetings, I'm new in the job, this must be the anomaly, not the exception, not the rule. And then I realized that there was and still is to a large extent the rule, not the exception. And I have always seen technology as an enabler for change, and I'm a big believer that people want to do jobs that are fulfilling, that are fun, where they can do the most with their skills and ability, and technology can really make people flourish in their jobs by taking away the boring stuff and enabling them to be the best version of themselves.
One of the things I think that we've both seen is that AI has been a streamlining function of many processes, and you've probably seen an evolution of that, which I think would be really interesting to hear a little bit about. You've seen an evolution of that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I'm such a grumpy old man, but I feel like it's the evolution of the search engine. We're very familiar with using search engines. Now we're using another technology to still like make the most out of all the information that is out there. So effectively, everything changes, but nothing really changes, just like a natural evolution. But as you said, the brain structure is that, and we're kind of like stuck with it. And one of the things to me that is always so incredibly important, and even when I think of my own choices, my own purchase choices as a consumer, brand is so important, and I want to be treated as a customer in a certain way. And I know you're quite a fan of this idea of the promise to the customer and brand, the value of brand. Should we maybe talk a bit more about that?
Yes, I mean, let's maybe just start with the evolutionary underpinning of why we remember certain things and we don't remember other things, because brand is really a function of a pre-opinion about something, right? So you cannot have a pre-opinion without it being stored somewhere. If you want to buy something, when you think of that thing, what will come to mind is a group of products from which you can choose. And it's very likely that you're going to choose from one of the ones that comes to mind, because those are the ones that your brain has learned are important. You know, are you going to pick something that's not there at all? We know from research that certainly when B2B buyers go to market and they want to buy a product, if you're not in that day one list, you're unlikely to be the one that's chosen. I think 80 or 90% in a study by Bain of buyers chose eventually to buy something that had been on their day one list. Their day one list must have been formed in the days minus 365 to day +1. And so it has to be there. And if it has to be there, and we have to draw on it, then we really do need to understand something that's profoundly important, which is the miserly nature of the brain's desire to do work. Like our brain is really overwhelmingly designed to be miserly in its use of thinking resources, which frankly makes sense of my whole life. Our brains don't want to do that. Like literally, if you spend a lot of time on cognitive functional things, you get glutamate markers in your prefrontal cortex that give you a headache. That's why you feel tired after 45 minutes of thinking, because glutamate buildup has happened and your body has to work hard to metabolize that out of your brain. Our brains are not built for you telling me 100 things and me remembering 100 things. Our brains are built for you telling me 100 things and me maybe remembering one. And that's actually the way that we have to start to think about what messaging should be. I've spent my whole career either as a journalist or in strategy, in marketing, sales and communication, in the kind of signal production world. Politics is all about signal production. But I've latterly, I think over the last 10 years, figured out that the signal production is not the important part, it's the signal reception. So if we want to optimize one thing that we have an advantage over, it's the understanding of signal reception. So I think I'm obsessed with that. I think I've been obsessed with that for 10 years in 4 different jobs, politics, brand, in different places, and now in my role at LinkedIn. And in order to understand that, you have to really do something that the brain remembers. And I would argue that advertising that doesn't understand that, campaigns that don't understand that, is just campaigns that are not going to work. It's creative that won't work. And I think that's probably it's like a controversial point of view,
Yeah.
but I hope
But do you think, again, with the lenses of the 2030s, do you think that what marketing teams need to start sort of preparing themselves for is having members of the team that can bring this kind of aptitude and knowledge into their work? Because what is a traditional marketing without this almost neuroscientific angle may not enable you to cut through the noise anymore. But what do you think is like the most important things that teams should be investing now or soon in order to thrive in the 2030s?
Well, I think a behavioral science-led approach is really important for the reasons that I have set out. I think one of the things about the 2030s is I'm fairly certain it's going to be an even more difficult environment in which to attract attention, because people will have both a multitude of different places that they can go to, and they'll have their own communities that they feel very at home in. And so it's going to be more competitive and more difficult. And I think that the entire journey starts with attention, which is hard enough, and then attention has to become memory. And memory is also very difficult. So how are you going to create storage in the brain for your product or service such that at a future time, when that person is thinking about making that purchase, you come to mind? But we understand that in order to be remembered, we need to tap into some deeper social, emotional ideas about how to communicate a message. But creativity is a very abstract concept. It's a very large idea. It's very hard to grapple with. Yep. But I think that collapsing the idea of to what end are we being creative? We're being creative in order to be remembered.
Some marketing campaigns, some advertising campaigns, they're still memorable. They remain memorable for decades. And then what you see is also the tendency with creative, but also in general with marketing, to focus on lower funnel, like hyper targeting, try to optimize even creative. So we got like hundreds of different variations of creatives. Make sure that people get the one with a higher click-through rate or whatever metric is relevant. And to me, that sort of sucks a bit the soul out of what a beautiful creative is. And I understand that there is definitely a trend, and this has been also a topic of the other episodes, of short-term focus on getting people to click, to buy, to do what, as marketers, we need them to do to achieve certain revenue targets. But then there is also the probably longer lasting and longer term goal of building a brand. And I don't think you build a brand by optimizing the creative, by measuring like click-through rate on each individual one of 100 or 1,000 different creatives. So there is definitely a short-term need for, again, clicks and revenues, let's say, but probably agree with me on this, there is a longer game of building the brand that will sustain that customer base, those revenues, that brand promise for years and hopefully decades to come.
Well, it's very interesting because we did a piece of research. It took about a year to put together with at the B2B Institute, with my colleague Jan Schwartz, with I think probably the godfather of strategy, a guy called Roger Martin, who is the dean of the Rotman School. So we did this piece of work because I think, to your point, I really wanted to understand one thing, which is, what do customers really value? And our hypothesis, which we tested across more than 2,000 or award-winning or award entry campaigns, and we asked one really simple question, which is, does a campaign that makes a customer promise, does it do better on brand health metrics, market share metrics, penetration metrics, long-term brand and sales growth than campaigns that don't make a promise to the customer? Because I think, to your point about all the many ways that we are going to have to compete for people's attention, and all the many platforms that there are, and all the many ways of optimizing something, a promise is a neurological, evolutionary thing that we understand. If we want to be in a relationship with our customers, probably need to be able to express to them why they think they should be in a relationship with us on the basis of a promise. So a promise is a very powerful thing, and it just helps us to cut through, should I do this, should I do that? And what we found on pretty much every measure, a promise to the customer performed better than not making a promise to the customer. But we also saw something that was very interesting, which is across a period of time. If you want to just, have an outsized impact on short-term metrics, whatever those metrics you're measuring are, making a promise and not making a promise are about 50-50. Making a promise is still slightly better, like 52 or 51, but it's much of a muchness. But if you want to drive long-term brand health and sales growth, 2/3 of all the campaigns that did that were ones that made a promise to the customer, and 1/3 were not. So if you want to weight your advantage to actually things that will fundamentally bring you future customers and drive the long-term growth of your business in a way that you can basically predict, then making a promise to the customer is a really important part of that.
I think there's a balance to be struck between working more, like repeating business with your customer. So making a promise, sticking to the promise, instead of being drawn towards like a quick win. Because actually the one-off win is very expensive normally, whereas repeat business is profitable. It builds on top of it, builds like positive recommendation, positive experience. So the aura that it creates is definitely much bigger than the quick win of, I just want a customer by pretending or making a false promise or anything.
I mean, a brand delivering on the promise it makes to the customer over and over again makes that a very strong brand. But I'd also say there's one thing, which is that a brand promise in and of itself is not as powerful as a promise to the customer. A customer promise tells the customer what you're going to do for them and that you are putting yourself at risk if you don't deliver. A brand promise can still be something very generic about how great the brand is, and it's like going to dinner with somebody and they, you go on a date and then the person says, I'm great, I'm amazing, I'm really trusted, I'm the most trusted brand in the world. And then you think, well, maybe you are, but actually I have to decide that for myself. You just telling me doesn't make that work. But if you go on a date and that person says, how can I help you with the thing that you want to do? That's actually that's a relationship. So sometimes a brand promise is not a relationship with a customer. If it's not customer oriented, it's not really a strategic function.
Very true, and this actually leads me to what I was keeping as the wrapping up of today's conversation, which is, if you could choose like the one thing, the most important thing that you want any marketing team, any company to invest in the 2030s when it comes to how they do marketing, what would that be? You may have already kind of answered. But
Well, first I also want to hear your answer. I think my answer would be to really understand the customer because then you'll be able to understand how to create value for them. And creating value, if I ask a 6-year-old, how do I create value for them? They're not going to be able to tell me, because creating value is a sort of businessy word, but really what you want to do is, a promise is something that a 6-year-old understands. Understand in the words that a 6-year-old would use how you help your customer, and then promise to your customer that you're going to help them in that way. I think that is a very robust model. If we had loads and loads of money and we could take loads of different bets, then that would be different. But now we're living in a high inflation world. I hope in the 2030s that inflation rates have come down, the interest rates have come down, but we don't know. And every marketer has a marketing budget that's not adjusted for inflation, has less money than they used to. So we've got to get better at our decision making. So work out how you create value for your customers, make that into something that you can promise them in the language that a 6-year-old would understand. And I think you have the best shot at growing that business.
I will build on your answer. Thank you for this. To just add that I think we live in a time where data is, we're not short of data. In fact, sometimes we have too much data, but for sure, we're much more capable now than we were 10, 20, 30 years ago to glean what the customers want and how they feel about the brand now. So not harnessing that data, not building that data into decisions for the future is almost criminal. So
data is a hugely helpful input into that whole process. And actually, we are actually getting much better able to understand the telemetry of a business, the signals that come from all sorts of different places. I mean, in our cloud world now, we can interpret signals in real time. So we have a lot of data, which is, in fact, very helpful and useful in understanding what our customers value. Yep. And in fact, customers often value different things from what businesses themselves think their customers value.
Yeah, and you know what, I quoted oftentimes Henry Ford when he said, well, whether it's a real quote or not, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have told me faster horse.
Yeah.
And that's still valid. I think companies that are true visionaries need to embrace that sort of vision. But the customer now, I mean, we're over 100 years after that Henry Ford quote. So customers now know much better what they want. Probably there is a lot of incremental growth and advantage to be had. So listening to the customer, absolutely important. And my one thing for the 2030s that I would encourage anyone to give more consideration to, if you will, is to be boring. And what I mean by that is actually be bold and creative, again, in building the brand and the creatives, but be a bit more boring when it comes to especially using data. I see too often companies and marketers who are thinking about the next thing, when the truth is they are not working on a solid base of data, whether it's because some data itself is missing or is not harnessed, or because they don't have the right skill sets within the company or within the sort of circle of partners. But people want to go to the next thing. They don't want to be seen as being lagging behind. And I would encourage people, make sure that you've got a strong foundation, brilliant basics, as one of our customers call it, and then build on that foundation. Because if you build something on weak foundations, that something is not going to last forever. It may deliver for the short term, but not for the long term. And I guess we agree that this is all about building for the long term, not just for the occasional purchase or the short term glory. And I think this is probably all we have time for. And I thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I wish we could carry on.
Thank you, Fabio.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
I really enjoyed it. This has been a great conversation. Thank you.
And thank you very much for joining us today. If you want to connect with me and myself, please do so on LinkedIn, and do go to adverity.com for additional content, and also to view episode 1 and episode 2. And with this, thank you very much. Goodbye.